Welcome back. Today you're going to learn the top 3 attacking plans in the most common opening in chess, the Italian game. I'll show simple, practical ideas you can start using right away. The Italian game begins with the move pawn to e4. Black responds with pawn to e5. You then develop your knight to f3, immediately attacking the central pawn. Black usually defends this pawn with their knight to c6. Next, you bring your bishop out to c4, placing it on an active square where it directly eyes your opponent's king. From here, black will most often continue with either bishop to c5 or knight to f6. It doesn't make too much difference because the overall plans for white remain fairly similar. For example, let's say your opponent chooses bishop to c5. You then play pawn to c3, preparing the strong central push pawn to d4 in the near future. Now, black has several different ways to react. Sometimes they even play pawn to h6, fearing that your knight might jump to g5 and attack the weak f7 square. This is somewhat similar to the fried liver attack, but in truth, pawn to h6 is usually just a loss of time. Still, this move gives us the chance to highlight one of white's underrated attacking plans that many players tend to overlook. Remember, the move pawn to c3 is all about preparing that powerful break with pawn to d4. And of course, in many variations you will eventually push the pawn to d4. But alongside that idea, there is another powerful plan that your opponent often overlooks. The pawn on c3 not only supports the center, it also allows you to expand on the queenside with pawn to b4, directly challenging the black bishop on c5. Once the bishop retreats, you can keep pushing pawns forward, gaining space and driving black's pieces backward. You might choose to push the a-pawn next, aiming to attack one of black's minor pieces on the following move, or you can strike immediately with pawn to b5, attacking the knight on c6. The inconvenience for black is that this knight plays a crucial role in defending the pawn on a5. Once the knight is forced to move, that pawn becomes vulnerable, and you can often capture it safely. For example, if the knight retreats to a5, you have already achieved a very favorable position. By pushing black's pieces back toward the queenside and the edge of the board, you limit their activity. This creates the perfect moment to suddenly switch gears and launch a direct attack on the kingside. One of the sharpest ideas here is bishop takes f7, luring the black king out into the open. Once the king captures on f7, you continue with knight takes c5. This not only wins back a pawn, but also delivers a check to the king. Very quickly, your opponent can find themselves collapsing, completely unprepared for this unexpected queenside to kingside transition. Now, if the black king retreats to either f8 or e7, white has an even stronger continuation, knight to g6. This move creates a deadly fork against the king and the rook. Since you have already captured the pawn on a5, your next move is simply to take the rook on h8, while black's exposed king remains under heavy pressure. This line is easily winning for white, but let's step back for a moment. If instead of moving the king to f8 or e7, black chooses to retreat to e8, white has another crushing continuation. You play queen to h5 check, setting up a pattern very similar to the scholar's mate. No matter where the king moves, white can keep the attack going. For example, bishop to a3 delivers another check, and after pawn to d6, you can finish the game with queen to f7 checkmate. It's a simple and elegant win. Now let's move on to plan number 2. This time, black does not waste a tempo with pawn to h6, but instead develops correctly with knight to f6, both improving their position and attacking the pawn on e4. The main move here is pawn to d4, but that leads to sharp, complicated lines with a lot of theory to memorize. Instead, I recommend a more practical approach, the modest-looking move pawn to d3. Even though pawn to d3 looks modest, there are still very aggressive attacking plans hidden within it, and we're going to explore them right now. Often your opponent will underestimate this move, thinking you are playing passively. That false sense of security may encourage them to strike in the center with pawn to d5, but this actually turns out to be a major mistake. After the exchange on d5, white has a powerful follow-up, queen to b3. This is a move your opponent often completely overlooks. Suddenly you are attacking both the knight on d5 and the pawn on f7, which would expose the black king to a devastating attack. At this point, black is stuck in an uncomfortable situation. If the knight on c6 tries to move away, whether to a 7 or a 5, it doesn't matter. Both options lose immediately because white continues with queen to b5, delivering check to the king, while also attacking the bishop and even the knight at the same time. On the very next move, white will capture one of these pieces and emerge with a decisive material advantage. All right, let's take this back and consider another defensive try for black. Instead of moving the knight, black may attempt the natural move bishop to e6, trying to support the knight on d5. At first glance, this looks solid, but in fact it creates a new weakness. By moving the bishop away from c8, the pawn on b7 is now left undefended. This gives white the chance to strike immediately with queen takes b7. Not only do you win a pawn, but you also attack the knight on c6 at the same time. And here's where things get really uncomfortable for black. The knight is under fire, but the queen cannot easily move to defend it. Why? Because the queen is still tied to the rook in the corner. If she abandons her post, white will simply capture the rook on a8, so what can black do? If the knight tries to retreat, whether it goes to a 7 or a 5, white punishes it in the same way as before, queen to b5. This move checks the king and creates a deadly double attack against the bishop and the knight. Combined with the pawn you already picked up on b7, you are now guaranteed to win even more material. In short, bishop to e6 only accelerates black's downfall and gives white a decisive advantage. Now let's move on to plan number 3, which happens to be my personal favorite. This plan is especially effective in blitz games, where you can rack up countless wins just by following the same simple blueprint. And the beauty of it is that it's not about memorizing dozens of specific lines, you only need to understand the plan. No matter what reasonable moves your opponent chooses, your overall strategy remains the same, and that consistency makes it incredibly powerful. So, imagine black continues with a calm, natural move, like pawn to d6. In this case, I recommend bishop to b3. At first glance, this move might look a little mysterious, but there's a very clear purpose behind it. Your light-squared bishop is one of your most important attacking pieces in the Italian game. It's aimed directly at black's kingside, where their king is likely to castle. Preserving that bishop keeps long-term pressure on black's most vulnerable area. There's another important reason for this retreat. Very often, black wants to push their knight to a 5 and chase your bishop away. By already tucking the bishop back to b3, you make sure it has a safe retreat square and remains on the board. This way, you maintain a key attacking piece while quietly preparing to unleash your larger attacking plan. By placing your bishop safely on b3, you've already solved several problems in advance. First, if black ever tries to attack it with their knight, you can simply slide the bishop back to c2 and the entire chase was pointless. Second, you no longer need to worry about defending the bishop. Whether black tries bishop to a 6 or some other attempt, your bishop is already secure and fully supported. But perhaps the most important reason for bishop to b3 is that it sets a clever trap. Many players think bishop to g4 is an excellent way to put pressure on your king side, pinning your knight to the queen, but in reality, this is exactly the move you want to see, because it allows you to launch a direct attacking plan, and if your opponent doesn't play bishop to g4 right away, then no problem. You can simply follow normal developing moves, stay flexible, and wait. In the Italian game, that move almost always comes eventually, and when it does, you're ready to strike. So, once black plays bishop to g4, the plan is simple. Push pawn to h3. This small move immediately questions the bishop. In most cases, black will retreat, because their original idea was to keep the pin on your knight. If they trade on f3 instead, that also works in your favor, since your queen recaptures and comes out to an active square, helping with your kingside attack where black is likely to castle. From here, you can even follow up with bishop to g5, creating a pin of your own against the knight on f6. In general, trading your opponent's bishop for your knight in this structure benefits you because you keep your attacking potential while removing one of black's key defenders. Thanks for watching.